I had sort of this idea of a new way to visualize Bitcoin and wanted to create sort of a web block clock, so to speak. And that was the inception of the Timechain Calendar project.
Probably for a lot of people, they look at this for the very first time and it's like, it kind of clicks maybe on another level that conceptually you got it, but now like when you can see with your eyes.
Oh, what's Bitcoin doing today? Oh, it's up or down X percent. Like, that's not Bitcoin.
Anybody providing true value to the world doesn't want anything but Bitcoin because they begin to recognize the value that they're producing.
There's so much bullshit out there and there's so much deception. The call is on you as a human being to like activate your brain, and you gotta parse through some of this stuff and identify the truth and the signal amongst a overwhelming amount of noise.
Hey everyone, Michael here with the Bitcoin Way podcast. Thank you for tuning in. Today on the show, I have TC of Timechain Calendar. This was honestly one of the most unexpected, coolest interviews I've had. What this guy has built is incredible. If you think you understand Bitcoin, but it's just kind of all in your head, he has created a visual tool that we actually show here in the podcast. Such an awesome tool. I think I'm going to spin this up, show it in my office, make sure I have it on my desk, something. I'm going to figure it out. But we also talk about his views on self-custody, running a node, mining, and we have a really interesting back and forth on his unpopular opinion at the very end. So stick around for that. You're going to love this episode. Hey, everyone. Like I said in the intro, I've got TC here. TC, welcome to the Bitcoin Way podcast.
Hey, nice to be here.
Yeah, I'm excited to chat. So this, I mentioned in the intro, but Tarantula introduced us, and I was looking for a guest because he had some things fall through. But I think I stumbled across a good one here, man. You've been in the space a long time. For people who aren't familiar with you and your project, why don't you just tell us, obviously not who you are, but sort of what's your background? How did you get into Bitcoin? How did you find it?
Well, I sort of consider myself a class of 2017. Like late 2017. It was around that time. Like I have a long background in web development. I've been, making websites and in the sort of like tech software space for a long time. And around 2017, I was sort of jumping around different startups, and I was working at one point for a startup that actually they actually did an ICO. They had a token. And I suddenly found myself in my line of work, I found myself surrounded by people who were very interested in Bitcoin and crypto. And so I kind of caught the wave of FOMO towards the end of that 2017 bull market. And that was my introduction to the space. I got into Bitcoin. I also, unfortunately, got into a lot of the other shitcoins and, those distractions. And to me, my whole first cycle was really marked by just getting my feet wet and not really fully understanding what was going on there. I sort of languished through the bear market of 2018, 2019, but I did sit on my hands. I held on to my Bitcoin. And I would say around late 2019 and going into 2020 and all the COVID stuff, that's when my eyes were really opened. And I really started focusing on Bitcoin exclusively. And my project came about a couple years later as I was sort of in between jobs. And because I'm a web developer, I had sort of this idea of a new way to visualize Bitcoin and wanted to create sort of a web block clock, so to speak. And that was the inception of the Timechain Calendar project. That website's been live for about 3 years. And that's what I'm sort of exclusively focused on work-wise these days.
Very cool. So I guess I got a lot of questions I could ask from there. I'm always curious when I talk to someone who's been around a lot longer than me, because I'm class of 22, and it probably wasn't until halfway through that year that I really kind of focused on Bitcoin only and that. How have you viewed the changing of sort of, I know people don't always like this term, but the Bitcoin community, Bitcoin culture, like, are we materially way different today? When you look at, X and, the correspondence there versus 2017, 2018?
Yeah, I would say it's different. I think there's always changes in the world around us. And the undeniable thing is that it feels very different now than it does 5, 6, 7 years ago. You
In
know,
a good way or bad way or just
I mean,
is?
I think there's a perspective that says that, I think every generation goes through its crises and feels like there's existential threats and witnesses big changes. And I feel like we've been through that. It's kind of a strange thing. We've all been through a really intense last 5, 6 years, and I think as a result, the world is a little different, and people are seeing things from a different perspective. But the one thing that's I notice after several cycles in Bitcoin is just noticing how every cycle there is a new slice of the pie. There's a new demographic coming through, a new group of people that bring in new perspectives, and then we also see the landscape change. Bitcoin does evolve. There's new aspects of the protocol, new projects that come along that really, introduce new types of activity, and so we're constantly seeing this sort of flywheel of new participants entering, and older participants tend to either stick around or fade off into the distance. So those narratives change. The narratives that really capture people's attention and help guide people's actions. Those things are always changing. So yeah, I see a big difference even since 2022. There's a real different feeling, and I think that's where again it's important, I think, to pay attention and see what's going on out there. But I think every Bitcoiner is called to really identify where they are on their own journey and work towards figuring out what the next steps are or what the next kind of actions to take to further their own understanding, their own conviction, and find the right way to proceed with Bitcoin.
Yeah, I agree with that. It's been an interesting journey. I think when I first got into Bitcoin, I was listening to certainly like mainstream podcasts I'd been recommended and that kind of thing. It feels to me like the amount of like pure signal and the emphasis on things like like with the Bitcoin way, like our bread and butter is helping people, training people to take self custody. We don't KYC, hold their keys, none of that stuff. And I found the Bitcoin way as a client like 2 years ago and got into it, and now I see more and more alternatives to that, and it feels like we're deviating. And I don't worry about the future of Bitcoin, but to like the I don't know, the level of conviction that future generations of Bitcoiners are going to have, or classes of Bitcoiners are going to have around some of these, what I view to be like very fundamental principles, like running a node, like self custody. And long term, I think the bright orange future happens when people do put in the work, they put in the time, and they don't use some proxy as their version of adopting Bitcoin or whatever. Do you share any of those concerns or that sentiment, or is that not something you really think about very hard?
Yeah, I mean, for sure. I see these cycles. I mean, that word is used all the time, and there's different cycles that are occurring. Um, I believe you're going to continue to see these, volatile kinds of like bull and bear markets result in, like I was saying before, all these different demographics of participants, new people coming in. And we all know when you're new, you don't really understand it. It's one thing to actually get the idea to acquire some Bitcoin, and then you learn, wait, there's all these different sort of form factors, and really you have to do some work, and you have to study, and you have to learn to actually end up with the real thing. And there's all of these sort of Bitcoin adjacent things and paper Bitcoin. I mean, that's really what this last cycle has highlighted. There's so many places for people to kind of find themselves on an off ramp, and they feel like they're within Bitcoin or they have Bitcoin, but they really don't. And then it's usually up to some kind of chaos or volatility, whether in the market with price that scares people and they sell and they don't hold on to it, or in so many cases that we've seen over the years, failures that occur. People leave their supposed Bitcoin on a platform, and then the platform implodes or goes insolvent, and suddenly people get rug pulled. And we see those things happen again and again. I feel like that's sort of the predictable unpredictability that you can count on, and the way to get off of that sort of going in cycles of sort of being led by the nose, being led by your emotions, is to shore up your understanding and learn how to actually interact with this technology, how to actually own Bitcoin yourself and attain some sovereignty. That's really the thing that I feel like it takes most people so much time to actually appreciate what it is that they need to achieve, and why that solution is so much more important than some short-term price changes. Because
Yeah.
it's like moths to a light. Every bull market, you get people who are looking for, oh wow, I can just do a simple thing and get rich. you know Most of those people don't last, they don't stick around, and it takes a little bit of critical thinking and time before most people come around to this perspective that there's a much more important reason to be in Bitcoin.
I I mean, I completely agree. The other what I will say though is what I found is, so I went down that kind of rabbit hole that you're describing. Like I started to study Bitcoin, understand the underlying fundamentals technically, understand the macro picture. Wow, this is all incredibly screwed up. Where I've gone more recently that I think could be a path for people who are maybe, I don't know, less curious technologically. They aren't going to spend quite the time to dig into that. It's not their background. Is I've gone down like more the historical rabbit hole, looking at sort of power structures throughout history and analyzing like our current environment through a very different lens than I had historically. And what my life has basically become is, even if I didn't understand Bitcoin to the extent that I do, I under you could understand it enough to say, this is my vote against all of the other chaos in the world. I'm done opting into the other system. And that other system consists of, big food, the military industrial complex, politics. I mean, there's so many facets of that other system. And if nothing else, if you understand nothing about Bitcoin except it is the hope for defeating many of those things, like to me, that would be the impetus for many people to come into Bitcoin. And so I think there are actually multiple ways to get into it. I agree with you though. The more you dive into what Bitcoin is, understand how it works, the more elegant it becomes. And I think that it's much easier for your conviction to grow in that way. I don't know if you make any comment on that. I want to get into Timechain Calendar.
Yeah, no, I just, the last thing I would say is it's the initial thread that when you actually find that thread and you start pulling it, it leads to all those other threads that are connected. The monetary system really is at the foundation layer of so much of our society. And if there's deception there, and if there's true leaks there, you've participated in it, taking that system for granted your whole adult life, until suddenly you realize, wait a minute, that system is corrupted and really broken. And then you dive into Bitcoin. That's the beginning of a very powerful shift in perspective that really does change your perception of uh, everything in our world around us. So, I mean, to me, it's a part of a real sort of evolutionary path for us as humans, as individuals, and collectively. So none of that is in most people's minds when they first just come up. They get drawn in by number go up, and they get excited about profits. There's actually quite a big leap to get over to this other frame of mind where I would argue there's just much more important things going on there.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. All right, tell me about Timechain Calendar. So this is a project you've been working on for how long did you say?
So the website's been live for over 3 years.
Okay.
I did just launch a mobile app that's also available on the Apple App Store and the Google Play Store. That was launched coming up on 6 months ago. So basically, Timechain Calendar is this project that I started to attempt to visualize my own mental model about Bitcoin. I had acquired a device that a lot of people are familiar with called a block clock. It's made by the company CoinKite. It shows you the block height, and it's a lovely sort of desktop or bookshelf piece of hardware that you display, and it updates and it shows you what the block height is. It can show you the fiat price of Bitcoin and a lot of other bits of data. It's a really cool piece of hardware, and I had one of those, and I was just enjoying staying aware of what's going on with Bitcoin, and realized at a certain point I wanted to see more. I wanted to actually evolve that concept to make it on the web so that it could actually update real time and include all these other aspects of my concept of Bitcoin's protocol. And since I was a web developer, I had the skills to be able to start manifesting that. So, I basically just saw the giant block height number, and I saw these circles as a way to represent these cycles that are going on in Bitcoin's protocol. And when the website was first launched, there was only two circles. There was the orange circle and the red circle, and the big block height number in the middle. The orange circle is the blocks to the halving. The red circle is the blocks to the next difficulty adjustment. So that was where it started. And I've just steadily evolved it from there. It's got 5 circles in the interface now.
Interesting.
We could dig into it more. But
Does this relate when Tarantula introduced us on X? I said, "Hey, what would we chat about?" You said Bitcoin is the best monetary system only because of its nature as an immutable state machine. Also, it's a global synchronization mechanism and calendar for the human race. I assume this is all one sort of concept that you're describing here. That'd be fair?
So there's actually a couple key concepts in what I said there.
By the way, you want me to try pulling this up for our audience?
Sure, go ahead.
Okay. You start explaining. I'm gonna get this pulled up.
Right. So let's talk about the calendar thing first. I didn't spend that long naming the project, but I arrived at this perspective of Bitcoin as a calendar.
Mm-hmm.
It's a really cool concept to think of Bitcoin as a timekeeping mechanism, and the design of the interface on Timechain Calendar actually evokes kind of a clock for a lot of people. But it's really, to me, it's kind of functioning like a calendar. A couple different reasons is because a calendar is a way of graphically displaying sort of nested time frames. So when you look at a typical calendar, you're looking at days within weeks and weeks within months and months within a year. And that sort of series of boxes in a typical calendar really does kind of help you watch your own progress through the course of that time scheme that humans have agreed upon. So, you have a calendar on the wall and you maybe cross out each day as it completes. And to me, what I'm doing here with Timechain Calendar is displaying a series of nested timeframes relative to Bitcoin's protocol. And what I was really delighted by, and now I'm very clear about this is kind of part of the purpose of the project, is over the last few years that I've had Timechain Calendar live to the public, I see people referencing block heights, using this as a tool to figure out what block height my kid was born at, or what block height did I launch my business? What was the first sale that I made? Or miners that maybe the first block that they hit as a miner, and so on and so forth. And there's so many different references for that. I mean, artists, a ton of artists that note the block height when they finish a painting or a piece of art. This is a novel, wildly exciting new timekeeping reference. And it's less of a clock and more of a calendar, in the sense that as these moments are associated, something in your life you associate with a Bitcoin block height, that ends up sort of becoming a parallel reference that as you continue to pay attention and awareness to Bitcoin, it brings Bitcoin more into your life. I feel pretty confident that in the future, humans are going to be using this as a way to um, coordinate. That's another aspect of this too. That's really, really powerful. I believe. We have moments in human life that we celebrate around the globe, and yet they tend to be divided up by just time zones. Think of New Year's Eve every year, and the fireworks go off at midnight in each respective time zone around the world. So, what should be a singular moment is really spread out across 24 hours. Well, when we have like the halving, for instance, or some other specific block that everyone's paying attention to, that's a singular moment that is experienced by every human around the globe. And I think that's really, really exciting and really powerfully important because I imagine a future where human beings all over the globe can coordinate an activity around a specific block height. And that can be something that we all have consensus over and we all experience and witness. And it can function as like a signal, a trigger, even for whatever. Use your imagination. Think about what humans might want to coordinate over. So, a lot of ideas for me that really make Bitcoin a really powerful resource and new vector for human activity. And Timechain Calendar is trying to tap into some of that.
That's a really interesting concept because sort of my parallel is I don't think about the dollar denominated price of Bitcoin now the way that I did, when I got into Bitcoin, right? Like, I'm thinking in terms of do I have more sats today than yesterday? And so like that's a measure of value. It has nothing to do with something external, like in this seconds, minutes. It's like a singular metric that we can use. So could you describe, I mean, I've got the page pulled up here. Do you want to sort of describe what it is that we're looking at? Maybe walk people through who are looking at this for the first time, like how you've
Sure.
designed this?
Yeah, I mean, right when I was finishing my rant there, I noticed that the block changed. The interface has a nice little rippling animation every time a new block hits, and to me, that's kind of the real essence of the spirit of the project. Is something I refer to as Bitcoin awareness. Hey, look, there's another one. So right there at that moment, while we're talking, block 936420 was received by nodes all over the world. And imagine months or years even before we had made some agreement about, hey, at block 936420, we're going to do X, Y, or Z. And that moment just occurred. What's amazing is that there's actually no mechanism in Bitcoin that determines when a block is going to occur. We hear this idea of 10-minute blocks all the time. I want to draw your attention to the circle that's kind of on the inside, where it looks like a bunch of little teeny tiny dots or squares going all the way around it. It's just inside the red circle. Yep, that one. So that's the last 24 hours of blocks. And if you just look at those little squares going around that circle, it's pretty obvious that they're not evenly spaced out. There's giant gaps. There's like clumps of blocks. They kind of happen whenever they happen. They happen sometimes in a second or two. Sometimes it takes an hour or two. So are blocks really every 10 minutes? No, they're not. What there is a difficulty adjustment that encourages the average time for blocks to be as close to 10 minutes as possible. So what we see here is a visualization of the last 24 hours of blocks. If you just move your mouse and if you look at the other side of the circle, sort of at the 8 o'clock position, you can see there was like an hour and 10-minute gap between blocks there. You see that giant gap. So the whole point is, this is an interesting little detail about Bitcoin that you might never be aware of. If you just heard, hey, blocks are every 10 minutes, and you take that literally, you imagine the system as something very different than what it actually is. There's this randomness baked in. So that's what that circle with all those little squares is about. The red circle is how many blocks to the difficulty adjustment. The indicator's right at the sort of bottom at the 6 o'clock position. It's about halfway through the current difficulty epoch. And in about 7 days, the difficulty is going to change again. And what happens is that Bitcoin's protocol will measure what was the average time for a block since the last adjustment. So the difficulty adjustment happens roughly every 2 weeks. That red circle is about a 2-week time frame. So what happens is the protocol, when it reaches difficulty adjustment time, it checks and sees, well, how much time has elapsed since the last difficulty adjustment, divides by 2016 blocks. That's the amount of time between adjustments. And it will change the difficulty, which impacts how hard it is to find a block. What's amazing is last difficulty adjustment, a week ago, we had a double-digit drop in difficulty. Blocks were coming in more than 11 minutes on average over that previous 2 weeks. And the protocol automatically changes the difficulty accordingly. And so it's now 11% easier to find a block during this difficulty period than it was the previous one. And as a result, blocks are coming in faster. Right now, we're averaging under 9 minutes a block. And if that pace continues, we're going to get a big difficulty increase in another week. This is fundamentally like the monetary policy of Bitcoin. This is the regulation mechanism in the protocol that actually governs the pace of blocks over a long period of time. It's kind of a contradicting idea. It requires a little bit of critical thinking to hold these ideas in your head at the same time. The one idea is the blocks are totally random timing-wise, one to the next. And the other idea is every roughly 2 weeks, the protocol automatically adjusts the difficulty, which impacts that pace over a long period of time. So that remarkably over the entire chain, and here's a metric that's at the bottom right-hand corner of the screen. It says time chain since Genesis, 9 minutes, 36 seconds since Bitcoin started. So since 2009, with a completely random process and only this difficulty adjustment kicking in every 2016 blocks to attempt to control the pace, we've remained remarkably close to a 10-minute average block time. And so this is wild to me. It's like this balancing act of randomness and a predictable aspect of the protocol that balances that randomness with an adjustment that keeps us relatively on track. And I'll just finish it with this thing, which I find really sort of meaningful to me. I believe this is really important to Satoshi, obviously, because if you didn't have an adjustment mechanism like this, and you had this random process, and you had the remarkable increase in the number of people competing to mine blocks, because we all know the hash rate just keeps going up, more and more people trying to win these blocks. If you didn't have this adjustment, all the 21 million would have been mined already, probably in the first few years. Right. Because the blocks would have come faster and faster and faster. This difficulty adjustment is so important to kind of balance out that increase in the competition and keep the block production close to 10 minutes.
Dude, this is such a cool way of visualizing Bitcoin. Like we all have these concepts in our head. I mean, if you've done the work and you've done your research, you have these concepts in your head, but seeing them in some sort of a graphical way is probably, for a lot of people, they look at this for the very first time and it's like, it kind of clicks maybe on another level that conceptually you got it, but now like when you can see with your eyes how this is working, and it's really cool. You pointed me to like the randomness. Like I know the blocks aren't actually found every 10 minutes, but I I forget that, you have an hour spacing or whatever here. And then we had 2 blocks already over, within a minute or two
Exactly.
that were found. It's such an elegant thing. So besides maybe giving people this sort of insight into, hey, this is really what Bitcoin is representing, is like, I'm going to make it graphically for you. What's like the objective of this project? Do you think, I mean, are you trying to monetize it? Is your hope that people just, download the app, log in, check it, is like a way of maybe recalibrating how they think about time and documenting important moments in their life? Like what to you is success?
Well, for me, the project has become sort of my complete work path. There's another block. Look at that. Um, for me, I work on this every day, and the purpose of it is evolving the concept and trying to find the optimum way of representing Bitcoin from my own mental model perspective. I find it truly impactful for myself. It's been over 3 years I've been working on this, and literally I have it on my screen in front of me the majority of the day. There's times when I'm staring at it, and there's other times when I'm doing other things. But when a block hits, even out of the corner of my eye, I notice it. There's also a feature on the website in settings you can turn on sound, and you can have a chime, like a little bell ring or a little water drop sound every time a block hits. So you don't even have to be looking at it. You could hear that little signal that a new block came in. And what's happening over time is that I'm developing a awareness of Bitcoin as those signals enter my brain throughout the course of a day, day after day, year after year. It's something that I feel has profoundly impacted my understanding of Bitcoin and hence my conviction in Bitcoin. So I see the value of having that signal. Think about this. How many people just look at a price chart every day? And that's their signal. Oh, what's Bitcoin doing today? Oh, it's up or down X percent. Like, that's not Bitcoin. That's literally that's order books on exchanges of traders who, for the most part, have zero conviction in Bitcoin, and they're just fiat maxis trying to pull off trades. That's not signal. Over a very long period of time, we've all seen the log chart of Bitcoin, and maybe that's some signal. But to me, day to day, to be staring at a price chart, you're getting kind of led by the nose. You're getting led by your emotions. You're not really seeing Bitcoin. But to see these blocks come in, I got to tell you, the last 2 weeks has been amazing. Watching blocks come in super slow. We had over 11-minute average for an entire 2-week difficulty period. And I'm watching that the whole time. Watching that, is this an anomaly? Are the miners going to pick up the pace? During that period of time, there was winter storms. There was a lot of people impacted by really crazy weather. The price also had a huge drop. You have to imagine there's some miners that just become horribly unprofitable at 70,000 versus 90,000, right? And so people have to literally unplug their miners because they don't want to pay a premium to mine Bitcoin. The point of mining Bitcoin is to get Bitcoin at a discount. And so when the price drops, there's certain less profitable miners who have to unplug. I'm literally watching that just simply by paying attention to the pace of blocks. What is the average block time? And I see these blocks coming in. Wow, they're coming in 12 minutes on average. Okay. And then it starts speeding up a little bit, but it ends up settling, 11 minutes and however many seconds. And wham, the protocol responds with dovish monetary policy. Well, we're going to drop the difficulty 11%. And now, for the last week, we're watching blocks race in. And it's a combination of the lower difficulty and the weather cleared up a little bit. So some people are kind of plugging back in. And to me, this is very meaningful. I'm watching Bitcoin itself. And that to me is the purpose of the project. How I'm going to monetize and create products and run a company, that's all still being determined. But to me, the whole point of this project is to find that signal and try to isolate a ton of information and reduce it down to just the key metrics and signals that really inform me of what's going on with Bitcoin itself.
Have you considered turning this into a hardware product?
I've
Like,
had ideas from people about that. It really does evoke a kind of a clock, and there's another
there's
block.
another.
Look at that. So yeah, I've had a lot of people suggest, well, I would buy a hardware version of this. Here's the neat thing: any display connected to the internet can display this website. So that's one of the reasons I love the web, is that you can display it on a giant TV screen or a big computer display. You can display it on your phone. I've even seen people with smartwatches pull Timechain Calendar up on their smartwatch.
That's
So
awesome.
that's the cool thing about the web, is that it traverses all these different pieces of hardware. I'm a software guy, so I'm probably not going to get into manufacturing hardware. But I don't know. Who knows what the future holds? Ask me in a year.
Yeah, I think well, I mean, what comes to my mind is I would replace my block clock in a heartbeat with something like this. If I had like a mini display, that's something I could certainly build. However, it would be really cool if there was some sort of a layer of software on top of that, like zooming in at certain point, like how on the block clock it scrolls through, like you can do dollar price, um, I don't even remember what's on there anymore, but there are like a lot of metrics you can show. A lot of it's very much fiat sort of price chart kind of stuff, though. If you had something like this that like you could scroll through it, zooming in on like the blocks to the difficulty adjustment, like isolating just that ring, and then I'm sure it's not actually that hard, especially with AI. You could probably spin up a program to do that for you, but um, man, this is it's such a cool thing. Is
I got another little thing for you to try, because we
yeah.
didn't actually get through all the rings. I want to show you one more thing on the
Yeah.
interface. So at the bottom of the screen, there's what looks like a little blinking handle. It's a slider. Slide it to the left. Now you are in control of the chain, and you can roll all the way back to Genesis.
Yeah.
If you let go, it loads the particular block. So move that slider to somewhere in the middle.
Okay.
And then let go. And look, you can see the exchange rate in the upper right corner. You can see the information about the block. There's also a search function. Hit the double arrows, it'll just jump back to live. And then on the other side, there's a little search button. But you can also just click the big number in the middle of the interface, and you can type in a block height. So just,
cool.
Type in 555,555 or something like that, and hit search, and it'll jump right to that block. You can also go into the future. So click in there again, and type 1 million. So 1,000,000 and search, and it's going to estimate block 1 million for you. This is an exciting thing coming up. Is it's showing you May 1st, 2027 at 2:35 a.m. and you have an adjustment for the block time. So if we know that blocks over the entire chain were 9 minutes and 35 seconds, so see exactly, you can adjust that, and you say, oh, it's really April 13th. And so this is a powerful block estimation tool and a block lookup tool. And so, like I said before, look up when your kid was born, or when you got married, or when you did anything during Bitcoin's lifetime. You can easily find things. And there's a neat way to search by date too. You can actually just click on the date, or you can click on the search thing, and you can dial in year, month, day, time, and search by a moment in time. So that's where this tool, this website and the mobile app, really functions as a connection between you and Bitcoin. It's like a resource for you to look up what's happened. It's a resource for you to sort of think about what's coming. It's a resource for you to kind of fine-tune your own mental model. Like, what do you see in your head when you think about these things? One more time, just slowly move that slider at the bottom, and you'll notice that the orange circle, which is the blocks to the halving, right? That's moving back. But also the dark orange circle on the very outside, that's the supply. And notice how when it passes the top of the halving circle, you just passed an epoch marker on that outer circle. And so you can actually really use this to kind of teach yourself and teach others what is this relationship between the halving and the supply. I love these kind of like unwrapping certain concepts like this. You know, pop quiz, we have a fixed supply, 21 million. We've all heard the meme, right? 21 million. How is it a fixed supply? And the answer is the halving. That's what function the halving serves, is that every 210,000 blocks, which is roughly 4 years, the amount per block that's issued is cut in half. And eventually, you're cutting 2 Satoshis down to 1 Satoshi per block. And then the subsequent halving after that, we're in the year like 2140 by now. But like the next halving after 1 Satoshi is 0 Satoshis, and the supply is done. So it's that halving that's the actual mechanism that enforces the ultimately fixed supply. So to me, just having a visual here about connecting those halving cycles to the supply, and you can see the supply is at over 95% issued. So it's less than 5% of Bitcoin's supply is remaining to be issued. And to have a visual of that and to have a tool you can interact with to kind of reinforce the idea in your brain, that's kind of the purpose of this.
Dude, I love it. I need to do a little bit of research on how I would love to have something like sitting next to my desk. I don't have dual monitors, believe it or not. I'd love to have something sitting next to my desk that I can just see out of the corner of my eye every time a new block's found. And it's just it's a cool reminder of like, and I think it's a good reorientation to what Bitcoin is, because there's so much in the news about price and what Larry Fink's saying about it and sovereign wealth funds. And it's like none of that is Bitcoin. None of that makes any difference in TikTok next block. Here's what's actually happening with Bitcoin today. So are there like instructions? Like I wouldn't have known to do this, because I want to make sure people know that, when they go to the site, there's a lot of stuff that I hadn't even noticed you could do.
So it's part of my roadmap is developing a little more tutorial material.
Okay. Cool.
That's why I like to take this opportunity every time I get on a podcast or something to just, point people to those things. The whole idea, it's a really simple interface, but, it's a little bit interactive, and, maybe it's calling to you to get a little curious and poke around and try it out. The really cool thing was I did this mobile app recently, and the mobile app is great, just right in your palm, to have this same functionality and be able to kind of look at these ideas on the mobile app. I did do a very simple little explainer, sort of 5 screens. When you first load the app, it kind of walks you through what the circles are. But I want to do more content like that to, make it as clear as possible. But really, that's the sort of point of this, is just I feel like it's really meaningful to have Bitcoin present to remind you that it is not all those other things. The world out there does a great job of distracting us away from Bitcoin, and there's so much noise, there's so much FUD. I think it's a meaningful thing, if you care about Bitcoin, include Bitcoin in your daily life, just making it present, just having it visible, just having that simple awareness. Sometimes it's not even conscious. Like if I have the sound on and it's a little water drip, and I might be completely focused on something else. I'm not sitting at my computer, but I hear that little sound in the background. In my brain, a little pin was dropped right at that moment. And that's Bitcoin awareness. That's like this thing I think we're all cultivating over time as we learn more about it, as we understand the importance of it, as we make these changes in our life to incorporate it and use that resource, use that tool. We all go through an evolutionary process. We change. So there's something really powerful about heightening our awareness on a day-by-day, moment-by-moment basis about Bitcoin. And that's what my project's trying to, be part of.
Beautiful, man. Anything else you'd point to on this, or we can start talking about some signal around some of these other topics that I was hoping to get to?
I think we covered Timechain Calendar pretty well. I'd just encourage people to try it out. Go check it out yourself.
Awesome. I love it. All righty. Hang on. Let me stop my sharing here and log off here. Okay, so we touched on this a little bit at the beginning, but like I said, at the Bitcoin way, we're all about run a node, take self custody. We've been really pushing people to solo mine lately, just to begin learning about some of this. I know these are all topics you have opinions and convictions on, so let's start with self custody. Where do you stand? And you've also been around for long enough to have seen sort of probably an evolution of custodial solutions and what people think of when they talk about self custody. What's your general opinion or guidance that you would give to someone who's maybe newer into Bitcoin when it relates to self custody?
Well, I think the biggest thing and the most important thing is that when you're new to Bitcoin, self custody is framed as an option. And I feel like once you reach a certain understanding about Bitcoin, it's not an option. It's not optional at all. It's required because self custody is actual Bitcoin ownership. Everything else short of self custody is at best a limitation of that sort of set of property ownership benefits and all the attributes of Bitcoin that you get when you actually control it. And at worst, most other things are you just don't have Bitcoin at all. Like that's been the interesting thing about this last cycle is the proliferation of all these paper Bitcoin form factors. You've got, treasury companies, stocks, and there's all these options and, futures and just so many different things where people feel, oh, I've got exposure to Bitcoin. And no, you don't. You have exposure to the action on the exchanges, which I said it earlier, that's outside of Bitcoin. That's not Bitcoin itself. And Bitcoin itself is literally Bitcoin on chain. That's what it is. If you have Bitcoin, it means you have the private key that controls a UTXO that's part of the UTXO set. The UTXO set is the list of all the spendable Bitcoin. Every time there's a new block, that list gets updated, and the UTXOs that get spent are no longer spendable. They're no longer part of that set. The new UTXOs that are created from the new transactions, those are added to that list. That's it. That's the only thing that's real. Do you actually control a UTXO or some UTXOs that are part of that list, that UTXO set of spendable Bitcoin? That's it. That is Bitcoin. Everything else is some affinity scam in my mind compared to that.
Yeah.
So if you actually realize that, you realize, okay, I've got to figure out how do I actually create a private key securely, and so that I know that it's mine and only mine. And then how do I move Bitcoin from somewhere else onto one of the addresses that that private key controls? And only at that point have you actually acquired Bitcoin.
Yeah, it's been exhausting, if not frustrating for me to see the number of people who, up until like the treasury company craze, for example. I mean, we had block, like, I mean, I was 2022, right? Like BlockFi, FTX, like all these things happen. Like I was there at the beginning, the beginning for me was in the midst of all of that. But people who, by and large, are, sending out some level of signal into the world, and then immediately they're FOMOing into treasury companies. And I'm like, you're distracted. You have to remember, it's one thing if you've been around a while and you're like, I'm gonna have some fun, speculate on a treasury company, Sailor's got a huge stack, maybe something crazy happens with strategy. Like, okay, go have your fun. What frustrates me is when I see these people talking about it so much that I envision, what if I wasn't as deep down the rabbit hole as I am today? I'm just getting into the space. I see that this influencer, whatever you want to call them, has 100,000 followers, and they're talking about how they bought Nakamoto, they bought it, and like people early on, you might actually believe that that's how you Bitcoin or something. And to me, it's just such an incredible disservice. Never mind, it compromises your reputation entirely, because these things have not so far panned out to be the utopian investment options that people sort of peddled. But I don't know if maybe you're more patient than I am. It's kind of getting on my nerves at this point that this is still a thing.
So what you're witnessing there, in my opinion, is um, really common, human characteristics. I feel like people are, especially in today's day and age, don't forget we're in a fiat world that has cultivated this culture where people are essentially afraid of new things. They're afraid of responsibility. They're afraid of anything that requires too much effort, you know? So I think we see a lot of that. And that's where all of these paper products really shine, is their sales pitch is very well received. Oh, all you got to do is just buy these shares on your brokerage account. You don't have to learn anything new. You don't have to, develop new skills. You don't have to learn about this protocol. You can just click and buy those shares, and now you've quote unquote got Bitcoin. But
Yeah,
it's
it's
yeah,
it's the Bitcoiners who haven't shed the easy button mentality of the
yep,
fiat world, I guess you could say, because that's what we harp on is taking self custody is not that hard. Like we train people, we have 80-year-olds running their own node.
yep.
The problem is you have to have a degree of curiosity, you have to be willing to invest the time, and you have to be willing to sit down and do the work. And
I've got a good
yeah,
metaphor that's worked in the past. And by the way, I have helped onboard an 82-year-old and a 14-year-old to using, Sparrow and cold cards, and doing the real thing. And it's not hard. It does just require that um, curiosity and work ethic. Oh, okay, I actually need to learn something new here. Let me pay attention. What about the parallel of driving? Because it's something I think everybody can relate to. Is that at one point in your life you were a kid and you didn't really know how to drive, and then at some point in your life you paid attention. Some people pick it up right away, but most of us, there's a transition, maybe for a few weeks, when you get used to, controlling a car and driving a car around and flying down the freeway. And if you think about the risk reward, I think we all know clearly what the benefit of transportation is, right? But we also know that it's one of the primary ways that people die in our modern society is on the road. And so there's this massive risk. You're taking your own life and your loved ones in the car and people outside of the car's life. That's a huge risk that you take responsibility for every time you drive. And you take that for granted completely. Now, look at Bitcoin from that same lens. Here is something that's going to make a massive difference in your future well-being and, the solvency and sovereignty of your family from a financial perspective. It's got massive implications. There's something to learn. And to me, it's just a no-brainer. Once you figure out the value there, you figure out why I need this thing. And when you get on the other side of learning these few skills and these few key concepts, you realize, wow, it's actually not that complicated at all. It's not difficult. And these are not like rocket science concepts. That's one of the things about the Timechain Calendar is I just visualize some simple concepts and suddenly it's like, oh, look, there it is. Of course. You just see it, you recognize it. You're not struggling with something vague anymore at that point. So I feel like there's a way to get through to people. There has to be a will, though. And people do have, just like when they learned how to drive, they didn't have to question, wait, why do I need to know how to do this? Obviously, you want to, take part in this amazing thing called transportation. Okay, now we're talking about Bitcoin and we're talking about sovereign money and we're talking about preserving your purchasing power. You want to take part in those amazing things, you got to learn something new and you got to learn the ropes and you got to get past, standing on the sidelines and just calling an Uber.
well said. What's your take on running a node?
So that's another one that changed for me drastically, probably in my second cycle, where previous to that, I thought of running a node as sort of an optional thing. And I think that's a common thing when you're a new person too. Maybe it's overwhelming because there's like several kind of buckets of knowledge and things to figure out. And so you might look at running a node as an optional thing. I think you get to a certain perspective with Bitcoin when you realize running a node is another one of these things I don't believe is optional. I think if you control Bitcoin on chain, you owe it to yourself to run a node. You gain massive benefits of privacy and permissionlessness by running a node. And the simple fact is, just like if you don't have the private keys to the UTXO, you don't have Bitcoin. Well, if you don't run your own node, you're using somebody else's node, because every Bitcoin transaction on chain requires a node. And so that's one of these realizations I had at a certain point. I was like, wait a minute, I never thought about running a node. And that means every transaction I've done up until this point, I've been using somebody else's node. I've been sending the message to somebody else's computer and saying, would you please broadcast this to the network for me? Right? Would you please, look up my balance? That's a crazy one. Think about every time you open a wallet and you want to see the balance, it's querying a node. So if you're not running your own node, whose node did you just ask to look up your addresses and what the balances are there? I mean, some of these things are a little shocking when you see them from the right perspective. And so it's to me, it's a required activity. If you have on-chain Bitcoin, you should have your own node.
Yeah, if you could come up with a way to visualize some of these concepts, I'd really appreciate it. So I can get in front of people and let them soak it in. And then I mentioned mining. Well, you mentioned mining as a topic you'd be happy to discuss. Are you mining Bitcoin, and are you solo mining? Do you have hosted miners, your own ASICs? Like, what's the status?
Yeah, I've been mining since the summer of 21. Um, During 2021, if you look on a price chart, you can't miss it. When we had that big crash in the middle of the bull market, that was directly related to China banning mining. And at the time, the majority of the hash rate on planet Earth was in China, and a ton of that hash rate got shut off. There were also some monsoons and floods and storms that led to more hash rate getting turned off. We ended up having several difficulty adjustments massively downward because the blocks were coming in so slow, because there was so much hash rate that came off the network so quickly. And that was a call to a lot of new participants to mining, myself included. I went through that FOMO at the time. I'm learning about Bitcoin. I'm watching the difficulty fall. And I understood the concept that, wait a minute, the difficulty just dropped by 50% over the last month or two. It is twice as easy to find a block today than it was a couple months ago. I'm going to get into mining. And so I FOMO'd into mining. I went through my own little experience of trying to run miners in my home. Unfortunately, I live in a very expensive energy area, and I quickly learned how uneconomical it is to try to mine at home where I live. So I was looking into options for hosted mining. I went through a really bad experience with a very well-known hosted mining company. I'm not going to mention them. And I did end up getting my hardware back from them. And at this point now, I'm partnered up with a pleb that I know who has a pretty large operation in a different area than where I live, where the energy is quite affordable, and I'm mining profitably with this person's help to host me. And it's in my opinion, another really sort of important thing, at the very least, to wrap your head around, just to sort of understand the mining part of this whole system. The random blocks we were looking at earlier, that's the result of the most furious competition on planet Earth, which is right now, at this very moment. Every miner out there, every ASIC machine is just hashing trillions of hashes per second as fast as they can to try to win the next block. And it's this just mind-boggling competition that consumes a mind-boggling amount of electricity. And you're looking at a group of participants that not only understand the value of Bitcoin, but they've enacted business plans and expended capital and put plans into action. The mining cohort of Bitcoiners is one of the best places to find signal about Bitcoin. That's why I said when I'm watching the average time of blocks, that's giving me real feedback about that landscape out there. And I don't live in a part of the country where there was this, real cold snap, crazy weather, but I'm watching it happen via the pace of blocks. And so there's a real incredible perspective, I think, in learning these things, even if you never do it. And it may turn out, though, if you start learning about it, you may realize, whoa, I actually have access to some cheap energy. You're suddenly operating with a new lens, a new perspective, and any situation you come across where previously you didn't see value, you might see value now. You never know. You might be the next, person to take advantage of this and find this amazing use for energy that was disregarded because that energy couldn't be used in the sort of fiat world. Well, in Bitcoin doesn't care where the energy comes from. So you could be at the top of a mountain or out in the middle of nowhere. That's one of the cool things about Hodl Tarantula, who introduced us. This guy is an expert at off-grid mining, and he does just that. He goes into these remote areas wherever you can get that really cheap, if not free, energy. It's just the proof of work required to actually go get it, set up an infrastructure, and harness it and use it to mine Bitcoin. And it's a profoundly significant, important part of the entire Bitcoin system that we all depend upon. We all depend on this fierce competition over blocks to enforce security at the tip of the chain and to make sure that the creation of new blocks is something that is not pre-decided to come from one particular entity or another, that anybody has the potential to be the creator of the next block that gets added to the chain. It's deep and really exciting stuff there. So I encourage people to look into it.
I love it, man. You've helped rekindle my appreciation for the elegance of Bitcoin, I think, here on this call. Hey, in the interest of time, we're about an hour. I'm going to blindside you here. I forgot to tell you, I have a final question that I ask every one of my guests, and it's, what is an unpopular opinion that you have? You get bonus points if you offend some Bitcoiners with it.
Wow. Okay. Hyper Bitcoinization doesn't look like what you want it to look like. That's going to be my opinion, that I don't think a lot of people are going to like. I remember last cycle, there was a lot of talk of hyper Bitcoinization, and that represents this idea of a somewhat utopian future where Bitcoin has defeated the central banks and taken over the world. And we suddenly have this world that has hard money at the root of it. And it has an impact on reducing, if not stopping, wars. And it changes people's behavior. I don't believe that's exactly how things are going to go. And I think that what we're witnessing, especially in this last cycle, with all of this paper Bitcoin, Wall Street jumping in with both feet, I think you're starting to get a taste of really what hyper Bitcoinization is going to look like, which is that Bitcoin is amazing. It's incredible. It's a critical resource to harness as an individual, as a business, as a corporation, as a nation state, as a financial institution. Every entity has that same incentive to figure out Bitcoin and to use Bitcoin and to plug into this system. So I think that's the thing I would say that might upset some people, is that I think that utopian idea that all these corrupt people and vampires out there are going to just disappear because of Bitcoin. I don't think so. I think the vampires are going to use Bitcoin too, to their benefit. Everyone's going to use Bitcoin the way they want to use it. And the truth is it's an opt-in system, and you don't get to say how somebody else uses Bitcoin. So there's kind of a setup there for disappointment if you've got in your head too strong the idea that Bitcoin's going to make all these corrupt, bad things go away. I don't think it does. I think that's human nature, that corrupt tendency. That's human nature, and that's going to always find a way to surface. I think it might ebb and flow, but it never goes away. So
I agree with that. For the first couple of years of my Bitcoin journey, I was a fix the money, fix the world guy, and I no longer believe that. I believe that I believe that human action is what changes the world. And what I'm hopeful for, I don't necessarily disagree with you. What I'm hopeful for is that having a base layer of money that everyone sort of has to capitulate to, because it is Seyfedin's monetary gunpowder analogy, um, might alter human incentives such that it gives a much shorter runway to the evil people to do their evil things. I agree with you. It doesn't eliminate the evil. It doesn't eliminate human nature. A new crop of evil will spring up when the old crop of evil has run out of their Bitcoin, so to speak, or whatever the case may be. I'm hopeful though that we at some point reach a point where how would you say it, that um, anybody providing true value to the world doesn't want anything but Bitcoin, because they begin to recognize the value that they're producing. Like, this is actually something that the world needs. It's not all of the fiat nonsense that we have in the world today. And that sort of creates its own circular economy, that you're forced to provide value, and everyone providing value is accepting Bitcoin only. Like, that's what they do. I think that's, to me, what hyper Bitcoinization kind of looks like in practice, and probably the collapse of fiat currencies. I don't know how long that lasts, or when it happens, if there's some sort of an alternate fiat system alongside of Bitcoin for a long time horizon. But I think I broadly agree with you that at the end of the day, the world has been the way that we perceive it to be now for forever. There have always been evil people. There have always been power structures that suppress the rights of humanity, the natural rights of humanity. And I think Bitcoin is a tool that can fight much of that, but it isn't uh, it's not like a get out of jail free card from the constraints that humans, have by virtue of their humanity.
yeah, I think that highlights a couple things. It highlights the responsibility that's required.
Mm.
It's not a get out of jail free card. It's a radical set of responsibilities that you have to adopt and maintain. It's behavior you have to like adopt and keep going constantly. There's also just maybe a time frame aspect to it. I really feel like people, when they're new to Bitcoin, they see everything through the lens of sort of memes. I was showing you, oh yeah, 10-minute blocks. Well, actually, guess what? They're not 10-minute blocks. You could do the same thing with almost every aspect of Bitcoin that you may have learned before. It's not actually 21 million. It's actually distinctly less than 21 million. It depends what kind of like detail you want to get into to understand some of these things in a more nuanced way. I think in regards to the hyper Bitcoinization comment, maybe it's time there where I think some people have set in their minds, maybe in the next decade, they're going to see these wild changes and improvements. And maybe that's where I'm coming from, a little bit more of a measured point of view, timing wise, that I think it's more of a generational thing. And maybe our kids, or maybe our grandkids, or maybe our great grandkids, when we're long gone, are going to figure some of these things out. So we don't really see them in our lifetime. I think that in the short term, especially in the next decade or so, you're not going to see shitcoins disappear. There's always an incentive for people to take advantage of and scam other people. And you're not going to see central banks disappear. They've already shown us their ability to reinvent themselves and change form factor. That's what vampires do. So I think we're going to see just a continuation of a lot of those things. And really, the onus is on you as an individual to figure out how Bitcoin helps you overcome those challenges. How does it help your family survive when maybe some of your neighbors are going to really struggle to do the same? So it's a nuanced adjustment. It kind of takes the glow off of some of the memes and tries to make it a little bit more grounded and real. You got work to do, and you got work that you have to keep doing, and then maybe you got a chance to have more choices and better outcomes down the road. That's
Yeah.
more what I would say.
I'll make one more comment on this. Something I've said before is that I think we have several generations alive right now who, by and large, don't have incredibly useful skills to bring real world value. Right? It's like if you look at like the growth of administration roles, like in hospitals, at schools, that kind of thing, where it's just really unnecessary fat. It's only there by virtue of fiat money, overregulation, right? And so where I think you're hitting the nail on the head, if this is what you're saying, is it could be a couple of generations before before an upcoming generation of people learning, going to school, being educated, recognize it's not about checking a box, passing a test, showing a diploma. It's about entering my working years with tangible skills that make me a productive member of society. And until that exists, I think I think that's maybe one of the positive externalities of Bitcoin, but it could be, to your point, our grandkids, our great grandkids, something like, I don't know how long that takes. It depends on how far they kick the debt, sovereign debt crisis down the road. It depends on how long they are able to play the charade. And eventually, I think we get there. But I think my encouragement to anyone listening is just lower your time preference.
Yep.
It might not be your life will, if you're 30, 40, even 50 years old, I think you're going to benefit financially from what Bitcoin will do over the next couple of decades. You might not get to experience some of the best of what Bitcoin provides because it's going to play out how it does, and that might not be, as quick as many people are hoping for.
Yeah, I mean, in the short term, it's optionality. I feel convinced that you start looking at longer time frames, 5 years, 10 years, 20 years. Undoubtedly, there's going to be more optionality for you if you have Bitcoin than if you don't.
Sure.
And you don't know if that looks like just being able to, increase your family's lifestyle and have a more comfortable life, or if it's, a ticket on a private plane to get out of Dodge when things go sideways. You don't
Right.
know. But I think that it's a really important set of thinking and concepts to adopt, because I think that's what the world is calling for now. There's so much bullshit out there and there's so much deception. The call is on you as a human being to like activate your brain, and you got to parse through some of this stuff and identify the truth and the signal amongst a overwhelming amount of noise. Bitcoin's an incredible way to start that. Like I said, the first thread to pull. But for a lot of people, beyond the financial aspect of it, maybe it's just that sort of turning your brain on in a new way that is the biggest impact. And I think we all discover that after a number of years and after reaching a certain perspective on Bitcoin. Undeniably, you've evolved as a human. You're kind of in a lot of ways a better version of yourself. So that's what I really, I'm driven by for myself. And I hope anyone else out there who's discovering Bitcoin and just getting into it, like that should be something that you notice after time, and it should really be your primary incentive to keep going deeper down the rabbit hole.
I love it, man. Alrighty. I think that's a good place to wrap up. Why don't you tell people where they can follow you, find a Timechain Calendar, anything else you want to share?
Yeah, timechaincalendar.com, the website, and Timechain Calendar, the app on iOS and on Android in the both of those app stores. And you can find me on X. The project is at Timechain Cal. That's CAL at the end. And then I'm also on Noster. You can find the Nippo5 TC at timechaincalendar.com. That's how you can find the Noster profile there. But mostly just check out the actual app, Timechain Calendar, and start getting some more Bitcoin awareness. I think that's the most I care about. You don't need to get a hold of me. You need to get a hold of your own Bitcoin awareness. And I'm hopefully trying to help with that. So that's it.
Well said, man. Thank you so much for being here. This has been an absolute blast. Really appreciate it.
Awesome. Likewise. Cheers.
All right. Take care, brother. And that's a wrap. Again, hope you enjoyed my conversation with TC. Go check out Timechain Calendar. Such a cool project. You will absolutely become obsessed with it, is my anticipation. And give them a follow on X, Nostr, wherever you are. And if you're enjoying the show, do me a huge favor, give us a like, subscribe, comment, share it with someone who you think might be interested. We would really appreciate you helping feed the algorithm to try getting high signal Bitcoin content out there. No suit coiners, no nonsense, none of the fiat games. And of course, go to thebitcoinway.com/podcast if you need help getting your Bitcoin into proper 100% self-custody. We can also help you with cybersecurity, privacy phones. We've got a Plan B residency option, and you can schedule a free 30-minute call with our team to learn more. Again, that's thebitcoinway.com/podcast. Until next time, stay safe, stay sovereign, and remember, the yield on Bitcoin is freedom.